Let's bring in Hunter Walker and Heather Long. Hunter is a White House correspondent for Yahoo News. Heather is an economics correspondent for The Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. Let's turn to a conversation that has been ongoing about the economy. President Trump spent part of this morning tweeting attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell as he fends off fears of a recession. The president said, quote, "Our economy is very strong, despite the horrendous lack of vision by Jay Powell and the Fed. But the Democrats are trying to will the economy to be bad for purposes of the 2020 election." Several members of the Trump administration echoed the president, pushing back on the idea that a recession is coming. Let's listen to some of that.
Well, I tell you what, I sure don't see a recession.
The fact is the fundamentals of our economy are very strong, and you know it.
What I'm seeing, looking at all the macro tea leaves, is a very strong Trump economy and bullish stock market through 2020 and beyond. And the things I'm seeing now.
All right, so Heather, there is no way, of course, to predict the future, but what do the signs indicate right now about the state of the economy?
Well, the president keeps saying that there's no recession in sight, but his actions appear to signal a lot more concern about a recession. He's been urging and demanding that the Federal Reserve cut interest rates significantly and that they start buying bonds again to stimulate the economy. We haven't seen that kind of activity since the Great Recession. Similarly, the Washington Post just broke the news that several top White House advisors are considering a payroll tax cut. So another tax cut to try to get more money into the economy. That would have to go through Congress, but these types of measures indicate a lot of concern in the White House about what's ahead in the next year or two for this economy.
Right, and Heather, just remind us, I mean, initially the thought was that the first tax cut in the Trump administration was going to be enough to kind of propel that economic success story that the president and his advisors had talked about as the very reason why that initial tax cut was necessary.
That's exactly right. The key for that first tax cut, the idea we were told was this was going to spur business investment. Businesses were going to open their wallets and spend, and that was going to drive the U.S. economy for years to come. However, what we've seen since then is we've seen President Trump's trade war, and it's starting to really bite in China, and Europe is on the verge of a recession. Mexico, just south of our border, is on the verge of a recession. A number of South American countries are also suffering the residual effects of the trade war, and so that's starting to turn around and bite at home, and it's totally canceling out a lot of those stimulative effects from the tax cut.
So, Paula, I think Heather just touched on it right there, but what is driving this very public pushback from the White House on this notion of the possibility of a recession?
Elaine, at the heart of the president's pitch for 2020 is a strong economy. So after last week's roller coaster ride on Wall Street and these indicators of a potential recession in the next year or so, the White House had to do something. You saw the president and his advisors out in force on Sunday, but their strategy was to deny a recession and then deflect. If there is going to be any economic turmoil, it's the fault of the Fed. But ultimately, the president has said that there is nothing that he is working on to prevent any of this economic turmoil. I've also spoken with senior advisors who confirm that. So right now, the White House truly believes that there's nothing they need to do to fend off any sort of economic downturn, despite what independent and even conservative analysts said last week were many indicators that there could be some rough waters ahead for the markets.
So, Hunter, does any of this change the president's calculus when he runs on this issue of the economy?
Well, right now, the president has made the economy such a fundamental part of his brand. You know, when he's challenged on questions of racism, he mentions African American and Latino levels of employment and how they're higher than they've been in the past. You know, he tweets the individual scores from the stock market. So, you know, I think Heather and Paula were really getting to a key point here. When we see these tweets from the president, when we see this full court press from the White House, you know, to paraphrase Shakespeare, they're protesting too much. They're showing that they are hearing these indicators of a recession, and they're also showing how important this is to his campaign and brand. So, you know, if the market really does take a turn, I think the conventional wisdom is that this would just be disastrous for the president. And one thing that I think is a really key point is, we're in the longest period of growth in American history. Economists have been expecting a recession around the corner for some time now, and that's without the trade war tensions with China. That's without some of these specific indicators and these global problems that we were talking about. So a recession would be a huge, huge problem for the president, and I'm just not so sure what he could do to avoid it.
Heather, you mentioned Jerome Powell. We talked about that a bit off the top, but why is the president focusing such sharp attacks on the chairman of the Federal Reserve? Because we should note this is highly unusual, to say the least, to have a sitting president attacking the chair of the Federal Reserve. Typically, this is not something that we have seen in past administrations.
Yeah, you're exactly right, particularly to attack someone that Trump himself appointed to be the head of the Federal Reserve. He handpicked Jay Powell, and now he thinks he's not on the same team here. This is highly unusual. The reason that President Trump and his team are focused so much on the Fed is basically because they've sort of run out of options. As you said, they've already cut taxes, they've already done deregulation, and they've already increased government spending by a lot. So they've done a lot of stimulus already. There aren't a whole lot of tools left that the White House can do, certainly without the help of Congress. And so they're turning to the Fed to try to urge them to do even more. I would also make the point, of course, everyone knows that if we're in a recession next year, it's going to be much harder for President Trump to get reelected. But an interesting situation that we're seeing evolve here is that the economy today, Trump likes to say that his economy is the greatest in the history of the United States. The economy today looks a lot like the economy in President Obama's final 3 years in office. So is it really even something that he can set himself apart from the last administration on?
All right, that's an interesting question. Let's turn to another topic here. Paula, I want to play a clip from President Trump talking about the issue of gun control on Sunday, and then I'll ask you a question on the other side. Let's listen to that.
Congress is looking at it very strongly, bipartisan. I put in certain parameters which you somewhat know about. I'm also very, very concerned with the Second Amendment, more so than most presidents would be. People don't realize we have very strong background checks right now. You go in to buy a gun, you have to sign up. There are a lot of background checks that have been approved over the years. So I'll have to see what it is. But Congress is meeting, bipartisan. A lot of people want to see something happen. But just remember this, big mental problem, and we do have a lot of background checks right now.
Paula, is the president moving away from his support for expanded background checks?
I don't get that sense. What is revealed in that answer, though, is the president was non-committal on specifics about exactly what it is that his White House would get behind. I mean, even Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said any kind of gun control measures, that's going to have to come from the president. We may support him, but that's going to have to come from him. And so far, he hasn't been specific about what it is he wants to put forward. But I've spoken with senior advisors inside the White House who confirm they believe this time is a little bit different. There is pressure. There is a desire to put something forward. What you can, though, glean from the president's answer is a suggestion that he's not going to be focused on guns. There's not likely to be an assault weapons ban. Instead, he's focused on the purchasers, on mental health issues. I think we all can agree it's highly unlikely that mental institutions will be reopened. There are a lot of civil rights concerns about that, but there is a larger concern about mental health services. But the U.S. is not distinct in terms of the level of mental illness, so it's not clear that focusing on that will solve this problem. And the president still says he wants meaningful background checks, but has not really been willing to fill in the details on what that will entail. It appears right now they're waiting for Congress to come back to Washington before they reveal exactly what it is they're going to try to put forward.
Hunter, I want to turn to you and a question about the House and a development there. The number 4 Democrat in the House, Assistant House Speaker Ben Ray Lujan, came out in support of an impeachment inquiry Monday. Lujan is the highest-ranking Democrat to back an impeachment inquiry to date. How significant is this?
Well, we've now got over 120 Democrats that have backed an impeachment inquiry, and he's actually, I believe, the 3rd member in leadership to do so. But this is still pretty significant, particularly because, in addition to his high ranking, he's long been seen as an ally of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And, she's really the key figure here. There's undeniably growing momentum for impeachment, but she really holds a lot of the cards. And, you know, what I've heard in my conversations with people on the Hill is that there are some folks who are not behind this inquiry yet, in part because they saw how quickly impeachment played out under President Bill Clinton. And, you know, it really only lasted a matter of months. And they would prefer to have impeachment, but have it closer to the election so that, you know, any witnesses that you're basically running a hearing against the president, and any damage that is done to him at that point can be done at a better point in the campaign politically for Democrats. I'm not sure that Nancy Pelosi's fully with that idea. I'm not sure anyone really knows whether she's, you know, in the moderation lane of wanting to delay impeachment or whether she's actually anti. But this certainly adds pressure on her to make her view clear.
Right, and it's very much an open question right now. Finally, Paula, over the weekend, the president said the U.S. is close to a, quote, deal with the Taliban in the hopes of ending the 18-year-old war. What do we know about what could be involved in this potential deal?
We know there have been ongoing talks between the U.S. and the Taliban about a U.S. troop withdrawal. We know the president met with Secretary of State Pompeo, I believe it was on Friday, while he was in New Jersey at his golf club. When we pressed the president yesterday as he left New Jersey on the specifics, he was non-committal. It's not clear right now what specific terms have been agreed to, how many troops would be withdrawn, how many would be left behind. There were also questions about whether that terror attack on Saturday night in Kabul, some have suggested the Taliban might be responsible for. It was an attack that killed dozens of people at a wedding. We asked the president, will that impact negotiations? His answer was that he doesn't trust anyone in these negotiations, and talks continue.
All right, Paula Reid, Hunter Walker, and Heather Long, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.